Imagine standing at the base of a towering Aztec pyramid in the heart of Tenochtitlan, the capital of a mighty empire. The air is thick with smoke from burning incense, the ground trembles with the rhythm of enormous drums, and thousands of voices chant in unison. At the very top, under the blazing sun, a prisoner is dragged forward, his chest bare, his body painted, his eyes filled with fear. Moments later, a priest raises a razor-sharp obsidian blade and with a swift motion drives it into the man's chest. The crowd erupts as the priest lifts a still-beating heart toward the heavens, blood streaming down the steps of the pyramid. It is one of the most infamous images of the Aztec world, a civilization forever associated with the horror of human sacrifice. For centuries, we have been told that the Aztecs cut open the chests of their victims and tore out their living hearts as offerings to the gods. To many, it is the ultimate proof of savagery, a barbaric ritual that shocks us even today. But here's the question: how much of this is true? Did Aztec priests truly remove beating hearts from living bodies, or is this image partly a myth, magnified by the conquerors who sought to destroy them? And if the ritual was real, what does modern science, archaeology, medicine, and anthropology reveal about what actually happened on those stone altars? In this episode of Dark Chronicles, we're not just retelling a gruesome legend. We're peeling back the layers of propaganda, diving into the physical evidence, and even asking the uncomfortable question, could a human heart really keep beating once it was cut from the body? Prepare yourself. This is not just history. This is science, myth, and horror colliding on the blood-soaked steps of the Aztec Empire. When we think of the Aztecs, one image rises above all others: a stone temple bathed in sunlight, blood running down its steep steps, and a priest raising a freshly torn human heart to the sky. It's a scene that has haunted Western imagination for centuries, a ritual so horrifying, so alien, that it seems almost impossible to comprehend. According to Spanish conquistadors who first set foot in Mexico in the early 1500s, the Aztec Empire was built upon rivers of blood. Chroniclers like Bernal Díaz del Castillo and Hernán Cortés described temples where thousands of skulls were displayed, altars dripping with gore, and ceremonies where victims, sometimes by the hundreds, were sacrificed in a single day. They claimed that the Aztecs cut into the chests of their captives with obsidian knives, pulled out the still-beating heart, and offered it to their gods as nourishment. To the Europeans, this was the ultimate proof of barbarism. It justified conquest, enslavement, and destruction. After all, how could a people who practiced such cruelty be anything but savage? But before we leap to judgment, we need to pause. History is never that simple. The stories passed down by the conquistadors were written with blood on their hands and fire in their eyes. Yes, there is evidence that the Aztecs practiced ritual sacrifice, but the scale, the frequency, and even the exact method remain shrouded in mystery. Still, the legends themselves are powerful, and to understand the truth, we must begin with the stories as they were told. The ritual, as described by the Spanish. Imagine the scene described by the chroniclers. A victim, often a prisoner of war, is painted in ceremonial colors and adorned with feathers or garlands. He is marched to the top of the Templo Mayor, the great double pyramid of Tenochtitlan. There, 4 attendants seize him, pinning his arms and legs to a sacrificial stone. A priest, wielding an obsidian blade sharper than steel, plunges the weapon into the chest, just below the ribcage. With astonishing speed, he slices upward, severing the sternum, and with a twist of his hands, tears out the heart. In some accounts, the heart is still beating, raised high towards the blazing sun, an offering to Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the sun. Blood pours down the stone steps, staining them red, as drums thunder below. It is hard to read such descriptions without feeling a shiver down the spine. But what do we make of them? Could a human heart once torn from the chest really beat in a priest's hand? Could hundreds or even thousands of such sacrifices truly have taken place during a single festival?
The medical mystery. Now, let us bring in the lens of modern medicine. Could the ritual as described, the removal of a beating heart, actually happen? Surgeons and forensic pathologists have studied the accounts, and their answers are unsettling. The human heart, once removed from the body, does not immediately stop beating. It is an electrical organ, powered by signals that continue briefly even outside the chest. In modern transplant operations, hearts can continue to contract rhythmically for seconds or even minutes after removal, provided they still have oxygen. This means that, shockingly, the Aztec priests may indeed have seen the heart flutter in their hands. It may not have been the heroic thumping described in Spanish accounts, but rather weak, dying spasms. Still, in the eyes of the crowd, it would have seemed miraculous, a direct sign that the offering had reached the gods. What about survival? Could someone live long enough for their heart to be removed in such a way? Modern trauma surgeons suggest that the moment the chest is opened and the major vessels are cut, unconsciousness would come within seconds. Death would follow almost instantly. The victim, in most cases, would not have survived long enough to watch their own heart being raised to the sky. But to the spectators, it would have looked like the gods themselves had consumed the man alive. The meaning behind the horror. Why would a society commit such acts? The answer lies in Aztec religion and politics. To the Aztecs, the cosmos itself was fragile, balanced on the edge of catastrophe. The sun required nourishment, divine fuel in the form of human blood and hearts. Without it, the world would end in darkness. Sacrifice was not simply murder, it was cosmic duty. Each victim became a messenger to the gods, a gift that ensured the continuation of life. And politically, sacrifice was theater. It terrified enemies, displayed the power of the empire, and bound the people together in a shared ritual of awe and fear. The victims were often prisoners of war, taken in ritualized flower wars, fought not for territory, but for captives. In this way, sacrifice was both religion and strategy, both devotion and domination. A legend that endures. So, when we hear the story of Aztec heart sacrifice, we are hearing echoes of both truth and propaganda. Yes, the rituals existed, backed by archaeological evidence and supported by medical plausibility. But the scale and savagery may have been magnified by the conquerors, who needed to justify their own acts of violence. The legend endures because it is so powerful, so primal, that it captures the imagination across centuries. It forces us to confront not just the brutality of the past, but also the way history itself is shaped, twisted, and retold by those who hold the pen. And that, my friends, is where our journey begins, with a legend written in blood, carried forward in myth, and waiting for us to uncover the truth beneath the horror.
When we left off, we were standing on the blood-soaked steps of the Templo Mayor, staring at the obsidian knife and the trembling heart of an Aztec captive. That was the legend, horrifying, unforgettable, etched into European chronicles as if it were truth carved in stone. But history is never that simple. And if we look closer, small cracks begin to appear in the tale. Cracks that reveal propaganda, exaggeration, and the complexity of human culture. The Spanish agenda. First, we must ask, who told us this story? The answer, the Spanish conquistadors. Men like Hernán Cortés, Bernal Díaz del Castillo, and the priests who followed them. They wrote vivid accounts of Aztec rituals, full of gore and horror. But remember, they were not impartial observers. They were conquerors. For the Spanish, painting the Aztecs as barbaric was not just reporting, it was justification. By describing rivers of blood and towers of skulls, they could portray their war of conquest not as greed for gold, but as a holy crusade to save souls from savagery. Think about it. If the Aztecs were committing daily massacres in the name of their gods, then the Spanish invasion could be framed as deliverance. Every description of chests ripped open and hearts raised to the sun became moral ammunition. The worse the Aztecs looked, the more righteous Spain appeared. It's not that the Spaniards invented everything, but they had every reason to exaggerate, to inflate numbers, to dramatize scenes until they sounded apocalyptic. Numbers that don't add up. Consider the infamous claim that during the dedication of the Templo Mayor in 1487, 80,000 people were sacrificed in just 4 days. This number is repeated endlessly in popular books and documentaries. But let's pause. 80,000. That would mean killing 20,000 people per day, nearly 15 per minute without stopping, day and night, for 4 days straight. Logistically, it borders on the impossible. No society, no matter how ruthless, could physically perform that many sacrifices in such a short span of time. Modern scholars argue the number was probably much smaller, perhaps a few thousand at most. Still horrific, yes, but not the apocalypse-scale slaughter that the Spanish chroniclers loved to describe. So why 80,000? Again, propaganda. An inflated number is far more shocking, far more useful in persuading European audiences that the Aztec Empire was a kingdom of blood in desperate need of Christian salvation. Evidence from the bones. Now let us step away from words and turn to the bones. Archaeology provides a cooler, quieter testimony. Excavations in Mexico City, built over the ruins of Tenochtitlan, have uncovered human remains that bear clear signs of ritual sacrifice. Skulls with cut marks where the flesh was stripped, rib cages split open. Even that eerie cower of skulls discovered in 2015, hundreds of human heads mortared into a cylindrical structure. Yes, sacrifice happened, but the scale? The bones do not support the Spanish numbers. Instead of tens of thousands at once, archaeologists see evidence of steady, smaller-scale rituals carried out across decades. Still gruesome, yes, but not the industrial slaughterhouse described by conquistadors. So why did the Spanish accounts stick so strongly in European memory? Because they fed into a pre-existing fascination with the exotic and the monstrous. Medieval Europe already loved tales of cannibals, witches, and heathen rites. When the conquistadors returned with stories of living hearts torn from chests, it fit neatly into this worldview. It also served another purpose: fear. Fear controls. By painting the Aztecs as demons in human skin, Spain secured its authority not only in the New World, but also back home, convincing its monarchy and its church that conquest was not greed for gold, but divine duty. Thus, the story became larger than life. The Spanish did not need to lie outright. They only needed to magnify, to bend the truth until it snapped into legend.
Science meets myth. But let us not fall into the opposite trap of dismissing everything as exaggeration. Science shows us that the ritual could have worked as described, at least in part. For example, forensic pathologists confirm that the human chest can be opened swiftly with a sharp obsidian blade. The sternum is thin, and with practiced technique, a priest could indeed reach the heart in seconds. The organ might twitch or spasm for a short while after removal, just as modern surgeons have witnessed in operating rooms. So disturbingly, the Spaniards' descriptions were not pure invention. The ritual was real. What they exaggerated was the scale, frequency, and symbolism. They turned a sacred, fearsome rite into an endless bloodbath. The cultural lens. To the Aztecs themselves, these rituals were not senseless brutality. They were cosmic necessity. The world, in their view, teetered on the edge of collapse. The sun would not rise unless fed. The gods, having sacrificed themselves to create humanity, demanded repayment in blood. Imagine believing that every dawn was uncertain, that only by offering life could life continue. In that worldview, sacrifice was not murder, it was duty, devotion, even honor. Some captives went to the stone willingly, believing their death elevated them into the company of the gods. We must be careful not to impose our modern lens too quickly. To call it barbaric is easy. To understand it within its cultural frame, that is harder, but also more honest. The cracks widen. So where does this leave us? Between two extremes. On one side, the Spanish vision of endless carnage, rivers of blood, and mountains of corpses. On the other, the archaeological reality. Real sacrifice, yes, but on a smaller, ritualized, symbolic scale. The truth lies in the cracks between. The Aztecs practiced human sacrifice, enough to shock us, enough to disturb our imagination, but the conquistadors amplified it into a nightmare that justified conquest. This duality is what makes the story so enduring. It is both real and unreal, both history and myth. And perhaps the most haunting question is not about them, but about us. Why do we, even today, find the image of an Aztec priest holding a beating heart so irresistible? Why does it linger in textbooks, films, and pop culture? Maybe because it speaks to something primal in the human psyche, our fascination between the edge of life and death, between faith and violence. And maybe, just maybe, because by focusing on the blood of the Aztecs, we avoid looking too closely at the blood spilled by the conquerors themselves. Closing thought for Part 2. So as the cracks in the story widen, we begin to see the full picture. Yes, the Aztecs sacrificed humans. Yes, they opened chests and raised hearts to the sun. But the rivers of blood described by the Spanish, they are not history. They are propaganda, a distorted mirror reflecting more about European fear and ambition than about Aztec reality. And in that mirror, we glimpse a darker truth, that history is never just about what happened. It is about who tells this story and why. In the last chapter, we pulled back the curtain on Spanish exaggeration and uncovered the propaganda woven into their stories of rivers of blood. Yet even stripped of hyperbole, one chilling truth remains. The Aztecs did perform human sacrifice. But what exactly happened on that stone altar? Could a priest truly cut into a man's chest and pull out his beating heart in seconds? Was this scene the grotesque fantasy of conquistadors or a ritual made possible by anatomy and precision? To find the answers, we must turn not to myth or propaganda, but to science. Anatomy of a sacrifice. Let's imagine the scene not from a conquistador's pen, but through the lens of medical science. The victim, often a captive warrior, would be laid on a convex stone altar, back arched and chest thrust upward. This position was not random. It forced the ribcage to open and tighten the skin, giving the priest easier access to the sternum. Armed with an obsidian blade sharper than surgical steel, the priest would make an incision just below the sternum. Forensic studies show that obsidian can slice flesh cleaner than most modern scalpels. One swift cut, then another, and the chest cavity could be opened in seconds. Pathologists estimate that with practice, a skilled hand could expose the heart in under a minute. The sternum, surprisingly thin, can be fractured with pressure or cut along its cartilage seams. Once split, the rib cage spreads apart, revealing the heart still pounding within. How long does a heart beat outside the body? The most haunting question, however, is this: did the heart still beat once removed? Modern forensic experiments suggest yes, but only briefly. The human heart is a muscular pump that can contract independently as long as it has oxygenated blood and electrolytes. In surgical settings, when a heart is removed for transplantation, it can continue to twitch and spasm for 30 seconds to a couple of minutes if conditions are right. Of course, on the Aztec altar, there was no sterile preservation, no ice, no transfusion. Once severed, the heart would lose its blood supply instantly. The spasms would be strong at first, then fade within a minute. So, when Spanish chroniclers described priests holding aloft a heart that still throbbed in their hands, they may not have been fabricating. The heart would not beat like it did inside the chest, but it could spasm visibly, enough to terrify witnesses, enough to look like life itself had been ripped from the body. Science confirms the ritual's feasibility. When archaeologists and pathologists reconstruct the sequence, a disturbing conclusion emerges. The ritual was not only possible, but highly effective. A trained priest could restrain a victim, cut open the chest, and remove the heart in less than 2 minutes. The dramatic gesture of raising it to the sun was not the invention of Spanish propaganda. It was anatomically feasible and, in some cases, biologically true. And that is perhaps more chilling than exaggeration. The myth was horrifying enough, but the science shows the ritual really worked.
Evidence in the bones. If the priests truly split rib cages and carved out hearts, then traces should remain in the skeletons, and they do. At the base of the Templo Mayor in Mexico City, archaeologists have uncovered hundreds of human remains bearing cut marks across the sternum and ribs. These marks are not random violence. They are systematic, repetitive, consistent with chest-opening incisions. Some skeletons show knife scores along the vertebrae, where priests severed ligaments to dismember the body after the heart's removal. Others reveal decapitation cuts or signs of defleshing, rituals tied to the offering of skulls for Tzopantli racks. The Tower of Skulls, unearthed in 2015, composed of over 600 human heads cemented together, is further proof of ritualized dismemberment. This was not chaotic murder. It was an organized, ceremonial system of death. The altar as operating table. Think of the sacrificial altar not as a stage, but as a crude operating table. The positioning of the body, the tools, the efficiency, all designed for speed and precision. The convex altar forced the ribcage to protrude. The obsidian knife acted as a scalpel. Multiple priests assisted, restraining limbs and pulling apart bone and muscle. In essence, the Aztecs had developed a ritual choreography as efficient as surgery, though its purpose was not healing, but feeding gods. A ritual beyond death. The removal of the heart was only the first act. After the sacrifice, the body might be thrown down the temple steps, symbolizing a descent from the divine. Skulls could be mounted, bones preserved, sometimes even flesh consumed in ritual meals. Archaeological traces support these stages. Skull racks, disarticulated bones, and burn marks consistent with ceremonial cooking. This was not random savagery, but a structured system, every cut and gesture filled with symbolic meaning. Science and symbolism collide. When we combined archaeology with medical science, a startling picture emerges. The chest incision was feasible, efficient, repeatable, and supported by skeletal evidence. The heart could spasm outside the body, creating the terrifying spectacle described by eyewitnesses. The remains match the ritual. Cut marks, skull towers, and dismemberment all align with accounts. What seemed like the wild exaggeration of the conquistadors turns out, under the scrutiny of science, to be grounded in real possibility. The ritual was not a myth. It was biology transformed into theater. Why this matters? Why linger on such grisly details? Because they reveal a deeper truth, that ritual sacrifice was not simply about killing, it was about drama. Imagine being a captive warrior, seeing a fellow prisoner's chest split open, his heart held high, still twitching in the sun.
Imagine the terror, the awe, the conviction that the gods were present in that very moment. Science helps us understand how the Aztecs engineered a ritual so overwhelming it crushed resistance and reinforced faith. The priests were not just butchers, they were performers, choreographers, wielding anatomy to create a cosmic drama that fused biology with belief. So what do we learn when science dissects sacrifice? That the Aztec ritual was not fantasy, it was real, it was possible, and it was devastatingly effective. The Spaniards may have exaggerated the numbers, but the anatomy tells us the truth. The heart could be cut out, the body could be dismembered, and the bones whisper to us across centuries that it was done again and again. In the end, the ritual's power lay not only in the blood spilled, but in the spectacle it created, a theater of terror where life itself was torn out, shown to the sun, and offered to eternity. And as we step into part 4, we will ask, what did this mean to the Aztecs themselves? Was sacrifice truly about feeding the gods, or was there something deeper hidden beneath the blood?
By now, we have seen that Aztec heart sacrifice was not a Spanish fantasy, but a ritual made possible by anatomy and confirmed by archaeology. Yet one question lingers in the shadows: why? Why would a civilization pour so much energy into a ritual of death? Why dedicate entire wars not to conquest, but to the capture of victims destined for the altar? To answer, we must look beyond blood and bone. We must explore how sacrifice stood at the crossroads of religion, politics, and war, and how the heart of one captive could keep an empire alive. Sacrifice as religious contract. For the Aztecs, sacrifice was not cruelty for cruelty's sake, it was obligation. They believed the universe itself was precarious, forever on the brink of collapse. The sun only rose because the gods had once sacrificed themselves at the beginning of time. To keep the sun moving, mortals must repay the debt with human hearts and blood. The heart was the tonali, the seat of life force. Its rhythmic beat was the echo of divine fire. Offering it was a literal exchange, life for sunlight, blood for rain, sacrifice for cosmic balance. Every ritual was thus a contract with the gods. Break the contract and the world would die. But beyond religion, sacrifice as political theater. But while cosmology explained the ritual, politics gave it teeth. A public sacrifice was a performance not only for the gods, but for the people. Thousands could gather in the great plaza of Tenochtitlan to witness captives dragged up the pyramid, cut open, their hearts raised to the heavens. This was more than devotion, it was intimidation. It reminded conquered peoples that the Aztec Empire had the power to seize life itself. It cemented the authority of priests and emperors, presenting them as intermediaries between gods and mortals. To watch was to feel awe and fear. Sacrifice became a political tool, a weapon as sharp as any obsidian blade. The flower wars, harvesting captives. Perhaps the most striking evidence of this political dimension lies in the so-called flower wars, o Xixiaoyoyot. Unlike ordinary battles, these wars were not fought to conquer land or destroy enemies. Their purpose was singular: to capture prisoners alive. Armies would clash on designated battlefields, each side striving not for death, but for living bodies to feed the altars. Captured warriors became living offerings, trophies of both military skill and religious devotion. To die in battle was honorable, but to be taken alive was both a humiliation and a guarantee of sacrifice. Thus, war itself became ritualized, a mechanism to supply the empire with the blood life its gods demanded. And the message to neighboring states was clear: resist, and your sons would not just die, but they would feed the gods.
Sacrifice and imperial expansion. This dual function, religious necessity and political domination, made sacrifice the engine of Aztec expansion. Every campaign yielded captives, every festival consumed them, every drop of blood shed on the pyramid reinforced the empire's divine mandate. Conquered peoples became tributaries, not just of maize and gold, but of flesh and hearts. The empire itself was fed by war, just as the gods were fed by sacrifice. Comparison: the Maya. The Aztecs were not unique in ritual bloodletting. The Maya, centuries earlier, practiced sacrifice with equal fervor, though with a different emphasis. Maya rulers often pierced their own tongues or genitals to spill sacred blood, offering their essence to the gods. Captives were sacrificed too, sometimes by decapitation or heart removal, but Maya rituals leaned heavily on self-bloodletting, rulers proving their legitimacy by offering part of themselves. In contrast, the Aztecs rarely sacrificed rulers. Their elites orchestrated death, but captives paid the price. The Maya sacrifice was inward, legitimizing kingship. The Aztecs was outward, sustaining empire. Comparison: the Inca. Far to the south, the Inca Empire also practiced ritual killing, though in a form that reflected their unique worldview. The Incas' Capacocha ceremonies involved the sacrifice of children on mountain peaks. Chosen for their beauty and purity, these children were ritually prepared, intoxicated with coca or chicha beer, then buried alive or left to succumb to the cold. For the Inca, sacrifice was about sending messengers to the gods, ensuring fertility, prosperity, and imperial order. Unlike the mass public executions of the Aztecs, Inca sacrifices were intimate, solemn, concealed within the sacred silence of mountains. Thus, while all three civilizations shared the belief that blood nourished the divine, their methods revealed distinct political and spiritual priorities. Maya, rulers proving legitimacy through self-offering. Inca, chosen children as sacred envoys. Aztec, captives slain in mass to fuel gods and empire alike. Sacrifice as cosmic warfare. At its heart, Aztec sacrifice was not only ritual, not only politics, not only fear. It was cosmic warfare. The Aztecs believed they were locked in an eternal struggle to sustain the fifth sun, the current age of the world. Every battle, every flower war, every heart cut from a chest was part of this cosmic fight. To shed blood was to arm the sun against darkness. To kill was to prevent the end of time. Thus, even a single captive's death resonated far beyond the temple steps. It was not murder, but metaphysics, an act that kept the universe alive. The dual nature of sacrifice. And so we see the dual nature of Aztec sacrifice. Religious, a cosmic debt repaid to the gods. Political, a weapon of terror to control subjects. Military, the very goal of war itself, the reason captives mattered more than conquest. The flower wars ensured a steady stream of victims. Public rituals reminded subjects of divine and imperial power. And the ideology behind it all convinced the Aztecs that without this blood, the sun would fail. Closing thought for Part 4. Sacrifice, then, was not an aberration or a quirk of Aztec culture. It was the very skeleton of their empire, the spine that held together religion, politics, and war. To remove it would have been to collapse the system. And indeed, when the Spanish arrived, they did not simply conquer arties. They shattered the rituals that bound people to gods and gods to empire. But before that collapse, for nearly a century, the Aztecs ruled an empire drenched in both faith and fear, an empire where the fate of the cosmos could hang on the beating heart of a single prisoner. As we move into Part 5, we will descend deeper still. How did ordinary people perceive this system? Did they accept it, fear it, resist it, or find ways to live with death looming over every festival?
When the Spanish conquistadors destroyed the temples of Tenochtitlan, they thought they had buried the Aztec gods beneath rubble and ash. Yet 5 centuries later, the image of Aztec sacrifice still pulses in the modern imagination, more alive than the heart of any victim once raised to the sun. From horror films to history books, from comic books to video games, the obsidian blade still gleams. But what we see today is not the ritual itself. It is a shadow, distorted by fear, fascination, and myth-making. Why does the image of the Aztec sacrifice continue to haunt us? And what does it say about our obsession with blood, power, and the boundaries of civilization? The sacrifice on screen, from exotic horror to Hollywood spectacle. Cinematic history is littered with depictions of Aztec sacrifice. In early European films, the scene was often used as a shorthand for savagery, brown-skinned priests dragging pale-skinned victims up pyramids, a spectacle of barbarism meant to confirm Western superiority. Later, Hollywood would take this fascination further. Films like Apocalypto, though focused on the Maya, not the Aztecs, cemented the image of endless lines of captives, their chests ripped open in the name of alien gods. The truth of history mattered less than the visceral spectacle of blood and fear. Even children's cartoons and adventure serials, from Tintin to Scooby-Doo, played with the trope, pyramids, obsidian knives, and doomed explorers. The sacrifice scene became a visual cliché, the ultimate exotic backdrop of terror. In video games, from Civilization to Assassin's Creed, sacrifice often appears as both mechanic and set piece. It offers players the thrill of control over life and death, wrapped in the trappings of ancient ritual. Thus, Aztec sacrifice became part of pop culture's endless gallery of horrors, alongside Dracula's fangs and Frankenstein's monster. Fear and fascination in the Western mind. Why has the image endured so powerfully? Part of the answer lies in Western fears of the other. For centuries, European colonizers framed themselves as bringers of light to a world of darkness. The image of Aztec sacrifice, hearts torn from chests, bodies tumbling down pyramid steps, served as proof that conquest was justified. Even today, the idea of man-eating priests lingers in the Western imagination. It allows modern audiences to feel both horrified and superior, safely gazing upon barbarity from a distance. But fascination is never one-sided. Alongside fear, there has always been a darker attraction. The ritual seems to embody something primal, something buried beneath centuries of polite civilization. The recognition that violence, power, and the sacred are forever intertwined. Sacrifice horrifies us because it reminds us of ourselves. The romanticization of the savage. At the same time, modern culture has often swung in the opposite direction, from demonization to romanticization. For some artists, writers, and even spiritual seekers, the Aztecs represent a society unafraid of death, willing to face the brutality of existence head-on. Sacrifice becomes not horror, but authenticity, a rejection of Western hypocrisy that hides its violence behind prisons, armies, and silent wars. New Age movements sometimes invoke Aztec or Mesoamerican spirituality as a source of mystical wisdom. The blood-soaked pyramid is reimagined as a site of cosmic connection, stripped of its terror and remade into something sublime. In literature and fantasy, the noble savage trope paints Aztec priests as tragic figures, guardians of a truth too terrible for modernity to bear. Violence is no longer barbarism, it is philosophy, cosmology, destiny. Thus, the same ritual can be denounced as monstrous and celebrated as profound, depending on who is looking.
Academic debates. History or exaggeration? Meanwhile, in the halls of academia, the debate continues. Some historians argue that Spanish chroniclers wildly exaggerated the scale of sacrifice, inflating numbers to paint the Aztecs as demons and justify their own conquest. They point to the conquistadors' vested interest in portraying themselves as saviors rather than invaders. Others counter that archaeological evidence, from cut-marked bones to the remains at Templo Mayor, confirms that sacrifice was not only real, but massive in scale. The Spanish may have lied about the numbers, but not about the ritual itself. And then there are the anthropologists who take a different view entirely. To them, the debate over how many misses the point. What matters is not the statistics, but the worldview.
a cosmos sustained by blood, a politics built on fear, a society where death was currency. Thus, scholarship itself mirrors the public imagination, divided between horror, skepticism, and fascination. The sacrifice as mirror. Why does this ancient ritual still grip us? Perhaps because it serves as a mirror. When we look at the Aztec sacrifice, we are not only gazing at the past, we are staring into our own obsessions, with violence, with power, with the line between civilization and savagery. We see echoes of the sacrifice in modern warfare, in state executions, in the quiet violence hidden in supply chains in economies. We cloak our rituals in bureaucracy, but the machinery of blood still runs. The Aztec altar horrifies us because it is too honest. It lays bare what we would rather conceal, that all societies, in one form or another, feed on the lives of others. Closing thought for Part 5. 500 years have passed since the last heart was lifted on the steps of the Templo Mayor, yet the ritual has never truly ended. It survives in film and fantasy, in scholarly debates, in political rhetoric, in our nightmares, in our fascinations. The Aztec sacrifice has become more than history. It is myth, symbol, obsession, a story we tell again and again because it forces us to confront the oldest human question: what is the price of survival, and who must pay it? And as we prepare for Part 6, we face the final layer of the story. Not the blood, not the bones, not the myths, but the enduring human struggle to understand the meaning of sacrifice itself.
The story of Aztec sacrifice is not just a tale of knives and pyramids. It is a window into the human condition itself, our need to give, to take, to balance the ledger between life and death. We began with legend, the obsidian blade flashing in the sun, the heart lifted skyward to feed gods who demanded blood. We traveled through myth and propaganda, through archaeology and medicine, through religion and war. And now, at the end of this journey, one question remains: what does it all mean for them and for us? Death as currency. To the Aztecs, death was not an ending, but a transaction. Life was borrowed from the gods, and one day it had to be repaid. Every drop of blood spilled on the stone steps was a reminder of this debt. In their worldview, the universe was fragile, precariously balanced on the edge of collapse. Only sacrifice could keep the sun from stalling, the crops from failing, the cosmos from unraveling into eternal darkness. It is easy for us, centuries later, to dismiss this as superstition, but beneath it lies a truth that transcends time. Survival always has a cost. The echo in our world. When we strip away the feathers and obsidian, the drums and incense, what remains is a principle as old as humanity itself. One life must often be given so that others may endure. Modern societies hide this truth behind walls and policies. Soldiers are sent to battlefields so nations may live in peace. Workers suffer in silence so economies can thrive. Animals die daily in slaughterhouses so that billions may eat. We do not call these acts sacrifice. We prefer other words: defense, progress, production. Yet the logic is the same. Someone must pay the price. And this is why the Aztec ritual unsettles us so deeply. It strips away our illusions. It forces us to look at what we would rather ignore. The machinery of survival is always fueled by blood. Myth, memory, and power. The legacy of Aztec sacrifice is not only archaeological, it is political. For the Spanish, it justified conquest. For modern scholars, it fuels endless debate. For artists and storytellers,
It offers an inexhaustible well of imagery. And for us, the audience, it lingers as a dark fascination, a civilization that confronted death so openly, so theatrically, that it seems almost alien. But is it truly alien, or is it simply honest? When we cheer in sports stadiums, when we vote for leaders who send armies abroad, when we consume goods that come from invisible suffering, are we not also participants in rituals of blood? Our temples may be hidden, but the offerings are still made. The terror and the truth. The real terror of the Aztec sacrifice is not the obsidian knife. It is the recognition that violence is not an aberration of human history, it is its foundation. Civilizations are built on bones. Empires rise on rivers of blood. Progress is purchased with suffering. The Aztecs simply acknowledged this openly, dramatizing it in rituals that shocked outsiders and continue to haunt us today. Their mistake, or perhaps their brilliance, was in making sacrifice visible. By tearing out hearts in public, they revealed what all societies prefer to conceal. What we carry forward. So what is the legacy of the Aztecs? It is not merely pyramids and skull racks, nor the myths of conquistadors or Hollywood. It is a lesson, unsettling yet profound, that survival demands offering. Sometimes it is voluntary, sometimes forced. Sometimes it is dressed in feathers and chants, sometimes in contracts and uniforms. We too live by sacrifice. The only difference is whether we choose to see it. The final question. And so we end where we began, with the altar, the blade, the heart. But now we are not just spectators, we are implicated. Because every time we look at those rituals and shudder, we must also ask, what sacrifices have we accepted in our own world? Who bleeds so that we may eat? Who suffers so that we may prosper? Who is silenced so that we may speak freely? The Aztecs answered with brutal honesty. They placed the truth in the open, carved it into stone, and offered it to the sun. We, on the other hand, hide our sacrifices in shadows. Perhaps that is why their rituals haunt us still. Closing thought. 500 years later, the smoke of their incense has vanished. Their pyramids lie in ruins. Their gods have fallen silent. But the question of sacrifice, the question of what must be given for the world to go on, remains as alive as ever. The Aztecs offered hearts. We offer other things. But in the end, the principle is unchanged. Sacrifice is not just their story, it is ours. And perhaps that is why, no matter how far we think we have come, the beating heart of the Aztec ritual continues to echo in our own.
You've just walked through blood-soaked temples, stood beneath the shadow of obsidian blades, and stared into the beating heart of one of history's most terrifying rituals. And if you're still here, it means you too are drawn to the dark corners of human history, to the places most people would rather turn away from. At Dark Chronicles, that is exactly where we go. We peel back the myths, expose the propaganda, and confront the truths buried in bone and ash. Because the past is not dead, it still breathes, whispering warnings and questions that demand answers. So if tonight's journey unsettled you, if it made you think differently about sacrifice, about survival, about the price civilizations pay, then don't let this be the end. Subscribe to the channel, like this video so others can find their way here, and most importantly, leave a comment. What do you think about the Aztec sacrifices? Were they acts of devotion, political theater, or something even deeper? Your voice is part of this story. Every perspective adds another layer to the truth,
And in this community, we build that truth together. Because history is not just something we watch, it is something we wrestle with, something we must face if we want to understand ourselves. The Aztecs believed the sun would die without sacrifice. I believe knowledge will fade without curiosity. And you being here, questioning, learning, seeking, is the offering that keeps it alive. So join us. This is just one chapter. Many more shadows remain waiting. Until next time, this is Dark Chronicles, reminding you that sometimes the darkest rituals reveal the brightest truths.